Good evening. Welcome to our candidate forum for the contested seat on the Minnesota Supreme Court. The candidates seated in alphabetical order to my left are Michelle McDonald and Paul Thiessen. They will take turns being the first to answer the questions. The format begins with the candidates responding to the questions sent to them earlier by the League of Women Voters of Golden Valley. That will then be followed by questions submitted to the League of Women Voters of Golden Valley by email. Finally, there will be 1-minute closing statements. The choice of questions has been made by me in a good faith effort to reflect the interest expressed by those who submitted questions. If your questions were not answered tonight, please feel free to contact the candidates after the forum. First, a little background on the Minnesota Supreme Court. The Minnesota Supreme Court is, in effect, the final arbiter of the constitutional rights of the people of the state of Minnesota. Supreme Court decisions often serve as precedent for future cases. Currently, the Supreme Court reviews petitions in approximately 700 cases a year and accepts review in about 100 cases. These cases can come from the Minnesota Court of Appeals, the Workers' Compensation Court of Appeals, the Tax Court, the Lawyers' Professional Responsibility Board, and the Board of Judicial Standards. Election contests and appeals for first-degree murder cases are automatically appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is responsible for the regulation of the practice of law and for judicial and lawyer discipline. Additionally, as the highest court in Minnesota, it issues rules and practice and procedure for the legal system in the state of Minnesota. Each justice is a liaison to a number of Supreme Court boards and other state policy commissions that are charged with responsibilities ranging from day-to-day administration to strategic planning. There are 6 associate justices and 1 chief justice. Their terms are for 6 years, and they stand for election on a nonpartisan ballot. Again, as I said before, the candidates are Michelle McDonald and Paul Thiessen. We have a timekeeper so that each candidate has the same amount of time to respond to the questions. The timekeeper will hold up a card when there are 15 seconds left, and then a yellow card followed by a red stop card when your time is up. We ask that you finish your sentence and stop at that point. All right, the opening question, which was sent to each candidate earlier, is, why are you running for Associate Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, and what are your qualifications? You will each have up to 2 minutes to respond, and the first candidate to speak will be Michelle McDonald.
Well, I'm Michelle McDonald, and I'm running for Minnesota Supreme Court Justice to stop corruption, end legal tyranny, and restore justice for all of Minnesota. For the last 33 years, I've managed my own law and mediation firm. I've represented thousands of you before hundreds of judges at every level, including district court, appellate court, the Minnesota Supreme Court, and even petitions to the United States Supreme Court of America. I spent 22 years as a Hennepin County court referee and small claims court judge. Inspired by my clients, I founded Family Innocence, which is a nonprofit dedicated to keeping families out of court and resolving conflicts and injustices peacefully, where I'm volunteer president, I'm a mediator, restorative circle facilitator, and trainer. This past year, I developed and taught a restorative justice circle mediation training designed to restore relationships of all kinds through the use of restorative circles. Courts need to be places where people can speak and be heard without fear. My experiences have led me to believe that eradicating judicial corruption should be the highest priority for any elected official. What I've seen in court leads me to believe that the Supreme Court has an obligation to involve itself in community and restorative justice circles and other practices. I would urge the Minnesota Supreme Court to require more community and restorative justice practices at all levels of our Minnesota court system so that we can have justice for all.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Paul Thiessen.
Well, first I want to thank the League for putting this forum on tonight. I'm Paul Thiessen, as was said, and I serve on the Minnesota State Supreme Court since 2018. I'm running because I care deeply about Minnesota and Minnesotans. I have a long record of serving this state as a judge, as a lawyer, as a legislator. I grew up in Bloomington, the son of two public school teachers, and they instilled in me those basic Minnesota values which serve me well on the court today. You know, to work hard, to listen to others and to respect their point of view, to treat others with compassion, to treat them fairly, to be curious about the world and to really dig into issues and understand them before making a decision, and to serve your community. I graduated from the Academy of Holy Angels in Richfield, and then after earning degrees from Harvard University and the University of Chicago Law School, my wife Karen and I returned to Minnesota, where we've raised 3 kids. Before being appointed to the court, I worked for 25 years as a lawyer in a wide variety of capacities. I'm running for the court because it deals with matters that impact Minnesotans in very fundamental ways. It's a really serious job, and I take it very seriously. I listen to every person's story with an open mind. I strive to protect Minnesotans' constitutional rights, to uphold the rule of law, and to hold the powerful accountable. And I believe that I've done that, and I want to continue doing that on your behalf. I'm running because the preamble to our U.S. Constitution says that one of our highest callings as a people is to establish justice. That means for everyone. I have cared passionately my whole career about the need to make sure that everyone gets a fair shake. We don't live up to that ideal yet in Minnesota, and I'm running to stay on the Supreme Court because I've been working on those issues and want to continue working to make sure that promise is fulfilled. And finally, I'm running because I'm proud to be a member of a court that makes its decisions based on the rule of law. Minnesotans are often surprised when they learn that about 75% of the cases we decide as justices are decided unanimously, all 7 of us together. We need to make sure that our court is not a place where people are making decisions based on their own personal or partisan agendas, and I want to make sure that our court stays that way.
Thank you. We now move to questions from the audience. Candidates will have up to 1 1/2 minutes to answer these questions. We begin with Paul Thiessen. Mr. Thiessen, many people believe that our criminal justice system does not provide equal justice for all. What is your perspective? What should you and the court do, if anything, to address a lack of equal justice?
I think that the person who wrote that question is absolutely right. I don't think that everybody necessarily gets a fair shake in our court system. I know that our court system works very hard to make sure that that's the case. But the fact of the matter is that the same racial biases, gender biases, geographic biases that impact all institutions in this state impact the courts as well. And I think there are steps that we can take in how we write our opinions and how compassionate we are in terms of, as judges, making sure we're stepping into the shoes of the people that are here before us, understanding that a part of justice is also mercy and compassion, that humans are imperfect, and we need to understand that. We can also do things institutionally in our courts to make sure that that changes. We can do things like making sure we're instructing people on racial biases, internal racial biases that they may bring to the courtroom, both judges and jurors. We can make sure that we have a jury pool that's consistent with our population in Minnesota every time, so that people are getting a fair trial. We can do away, or at least look carefully at whether cash bail makes sense, because it keeps people in jail and makes them want to gives them an incentive to plea to things that perhaps they wouldn't otherwise plea to. So there are a lot of steps institutionally we can make. I've tried to be doing that in my capacity as a justice on the Supreme Court, even before that as a lawyer and a legislator, and I want to continue to do that because it's a very serious issue.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Michelle McDonald.
The criminal justice system is a system of injustice. We have laws that are unconstitutional. We have judges running amok. We have judges not doing their jobs. One of the reasons I want to be on the Supreme Court is what the Supreme Court does as an appellate court is judges the laws and judges the judges and their behaviors. So if we have a clear rule then that people know how to follow, then that's very helpful. But oftentimes due process does not involve clear rules. We also need government adherence to those rules. That's part of due process, and that includes the fact that if the name of the game is break a rule, you pay, then government officials, including law enforcement, lawyers, and judges, can't break rules in order to make somebody pay. I really have learned that our system is broken, and it is going to be up to the Supreme Court to change the way our system works. It has become a punitive system, and I intend to modify it to be more of a unitive system where people can get together and resolve their conflicts, even in the criminal realm.
Thank you. This next question will go first to Michelle McDonald and then to Paul Thiessen. The Minnesota Supreme Court can hear only a fraction of the cases submitted to it. What types of cases do you feel are the most important for the court to take, and why?
I think cases judging our laws and the constitutionality of our laws are the most important cases that the Minnesota Supreme Court has to take. What the Minnesota Supreme Court does is, with respect to our laws, and I'd like to say there are 64 million rules, laws, and regulations across our country. Okay, there are too many laws. But in particular, they judge our laws, and our laws, whether they're constitutional or not, and how they're applied. And I think these are the most important cases that the Supreme Court needs to be looking at.
Thank you. Paul Thiessen.
Well, I would agree with Ms. McDonald, first of all, that the constitutional issues that come up before us are one of the main criteria we should look at in terms of deciding whether we're going to take a case, because we unfortunately can't take them all. So that is an important criterion. It's something that I absolutely look for. We also look to make sure that the cases that we take are cases that affect a lot of people in Minnesota, so they're not going to just decide an issue before two people, but affect a lot of Minnesotans, so that it has a broad impact. We're going to look at cases that have not been decided before. So if it's a statute that hasn't been interpreted, if it's a principle of common law that hasn't been interpreted, we're much more likely to take that. And then at the end of the day, the other thing that drives me is if there's a fundamental sense of injustice, that the courts just got something wrong and someone hasn't been treated fairly. That's something I look at as well when I'm deciding whether we should take a case. And I think that that's really important, because at the end of the day, that's what our job is, to make sure that justice is done and it's done fairly.
Thank you. This next question will go first to Paul Thiessen and then to Michelle McDonald. While Minnesota is a leader in pro bono work by attorneys, affording quality legal service in our state is still out of reach for many, especially working people who make over the federal poverty guidelines. Despite reforms, the court system can still be too expensive and complicated for everyday people. What ideas do you have for real solutions to the financial and procedural barriers of the legal/court system?
Well, I'm really glad we got this question, because this is really perhaps my most fundamental passion as a lawyer and as a judge, access to justice. And what was said is absolutely true. You know, we could fill up U.S. Bank Stadium, every seat, and there'd be 20 lawyers to serve those folks if they all qualified for legal aid. That just doesn't work. Now, we do better in Minnesota than a lot of places, but there are things we can improve. I was a very strong proponent and active in pro bono when I was in my legal career, representing victims of domestic violence, families with disabilities, people seeking asylum in this case from persecution in their countries for political and religious reasons. And lots of lawyers do help in that way, but we can't pro bono ourselves out of this. One of the things I've been working on in the court, a very concrete solution that we're going to test out, is to see if in housing cases and in some family law cases, where 70% of people in family law cases aren't represented, where less than 5% of tenants in eviction cases are represented, we're going to see if we can have very well-trained paralegals provide some help and some assistance to those folks so that they at least have some advice going through the process. We need to be creative and innovative, and that's the approach and spirit I've tried to bring to this issue, both as a lawyer and now as a justice on the Supreme Court.
Thank you. Michelle McDonald.
Well, I think justice should be free. It's in our Constitution, and I think the lawyers charge too much. I do a lot of pro bono work, thousands of hours, and lawyers in their ultimate goal way back when, like Abraham Lincoln, we were assistants of counsel. We didn't get up and represent people and speak for them. People spoke for themselves, and we just assisted them through the legal challenge that they're having. Our rules and bureaucracy is very, very complicated. I think that justice should be free, and it can be free. The Minnesota Supreme Court, people don't know this, is also responsible for the budget, the millions of dollars that go into our court system, and they could certainly put the budget over to include restorative practices and restorative justice. Mediators are doing things for free at this point all over the state and the country, and the lawyers get involved and they actually mess things up. They get in the way, and certainly they're costly, certainly justice is costly, and I think that everybody should have free assistance of counsel throughout their process. And we should not be paying court fees and all these kinds of things. This is not access to justice. This is an injustice and part of the bureaucracy I seek to end.
Thank you. This next question will go first to Michelle McDonald. How do you avoid being influenced by your political beliefs in a case that might have a political dimension to it? And if possible, can you give an example?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, judges, first of all, as an appellate court judge, we're judging the judges and their decisions in the lower court, and then judging the law and how it's applied and whether it's constitutional or not. So a judge has a pretty easy job down below of discerning relevant facts, applying those facts to relevant law, and reaching a legal conclusion and making an order. It's not that difficult of a job. What we've lost is the judges down below are having beliefs. They have a belief one way or the other, and they're not using proper legal standards. They're using their beliefs to decide. For instance, they believe perhaps somebody needed to have their child taken away and might have been harmful to their child. They just believe it rather than applying the legal standards that are there to allow us to be able to maneuver through our lives and not get into trouble with the law.
Thank you. Paul Thiessen.
Yeah, well, this is a really, really important question because the role of a judge is not to be political, it's not to be partisan, it's to decide cases according to the rule of law. That's what we do. And it's very important that we stay in our lanes. And, you know, first of all, as a former legislator, I really respect this separation of powers and the power of the legislature to make policy. The power of the judges, or the lane of the judges, is to interpret what the legislature intended. And I really believe strongly in that. And I think if you look at my record on the court and the cases that I've written, you'll see that. The other thing is we have guardrails in place to help us do this. We have concepts of precedent. You know, if we've decided a case in the past that has a certain principle, we're going to follow that unless there's a very good reason, for justice reasons, to change that. We have rules about how we interpret statutes and rules about how we go about doing our work. And following those rules are critically important. It's something that our court, and I know judges across Minnesota, are actually very committed to. The other good thing on our court is that there's 6 other people for me to listen to. You know, we go into a room to decide cases together, and we decide them as a group. And again, 75% of the time we're deciding them unanimously. And having 6 other people, smart people with their own experiences coming to the table and having a robust discussion, make sure that I'm seeing the issues from a broad perspective and that we're following the law and paying attention to the law. So it's something I'm very committed to and I think is very important for our courts.
Thank you. This next question will go first to Paul Thiessen. I think this is an interesting question. You can range far afield on this one. Who are your judicial role models and why?
Well, that's a really good question. I think, one judicial role model I have is the judge that I clerk for, James Loken, who's a judge, was a longtime judge on the 8th Circuit Federal Court of Appeals. And he taught me, above all, first of all, that you got to write well to be a good lawyer, and secondly, that you have to think. Too often as lawyers and judges, most often as lawyers, we're so busy, we don't really think through the issues. And one of the lessons he taught me was, first and foremost, think. Figure out what the answer is by thinking hard. And it's one of the great joys of this job to be able to do that. The other justice I would say is Justice Brennan and his theory, his spirit of making sure that as the American people, we are living up to our highest values, our values of equality before the law, our values of due process, our values of making sure that everyone has a fair shake. And ultimately what he said is the most important thing for justice is that we're looking at the individuals behind the cases. We're not deciding them on the theory, we're deciding them on the arguments, the pleas that the people appearing before us are making, and to listen very closely to them as individuals and try to put yourself in their shoes. And that's something I try to do every day as a justice, and I don't always live up to that value, but it's something I do try to do every day.
Thank you. Michelle McDonald.
I have several judges that I've been before, out of the hundreds that I've been before, and I'm going to name Judge Bruce Peterson. He just retired from the Hennepin County District Court. He is amazing. I have been before him, and what he taught me is he came to one of our family innocence events and introduced me to restorative circles. And what he was doing is he was kind of sneaking this restorative work into his courtroom. For instance, I had been before him. We had a very hotly contested court trial, and before he made his decision, he actually brought us all into the room, attorneys included, and had us sit in a circle and talk it out. And he said, I don't want to make this decision, and he had everybody make the decision for him, and we all did. And it was after that that I learned that he was a strong support of restorative circles, and I want to tell everybody about them because before I met Judge Peterson, it was business as usual for me. I was a lawyer, I was not a restorative lawyer, and when I met Judge Peterson and he introduced me to these practices, I know that this is the way that we can all have justice, not only just in our communities, but in our state, in our country, and the world.
Thank you. This next question will go first to Michelle McDonald. What are two cornerstones of your judicial philosophy and why?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. My judicial philosophy really is to, it's a unitive system where, and it's not top down and compulsory. It's a unitive system where people involved in the conflict, whatever that may be, come together and they speak until they're actually heard, not just the words, but the meaning behind what was said or done. And I have seen this work. Conflicts disappear, miracles have happened when people can actually get together and understand each other and why they did what they did. And very serious things can happen. I also believe that most people are good people, that 99% of the people are good people. People make mistakes, and when somebody's admonished, for instance, that doesn't mean they're stuck in that place and they can't be forgiven and they can't change or transform. There's three reasons to put somebody in jail. One would be for punishment, the other would be for rehabilitation, and the third would be that they're such a danger to society that they have to be locked up. And we've lost the goal of rehabilitation in our court system. So really, my judicial philosophy is restorative, restorative, restorative.
Thank you. Paul Thiessen, what are your two cornerstones of your judicial philosophy?
Yeah, well, first I just want to compliment Ms. McDonald on her emphasis and advocacy for restorative justice, because I do think it is an important part of what should be more in our court system, and we're moving that way in certain areas like drug courts and like treatment courts, where that kind of model is being used more and more. But I did a decade ago, I did some work in Washington County on restorative justice, and I do think it's a model we should pursue. So thank you for doing that. I guess that what I would say is, first of all, I think justice has to be paired with compassion and mercy. People are not perfect, and we have to understand that in our system. We need to hold the powerful accountable. The one thing that I say is the only thing worse than an individual breaking the law is the state breaking the law, and we need to live up to that. I think we need to protect individual constitutional rights, both under the federal Constitution, but also under our state Constitution, which is an independent source of those rights. I've written opinions limiting government power to conduct invasive searches without consent. I've struck down laws that interfere with First Amendment rights to express yourself. I found unconstitutional laws where the government can take your property under forfeiture laws. I think individual rights are critical, and I also think that courts have a role in preserving our democracy and the power of communities to solve their own problems. As a justice, I've upheld local efforts to raise local wages, to make sure health care is available to folks, and I've joined decisions making sure that government officials listen to their constituents. Those are all things that are critically important to me in my judicial philosophy.
Thank you. Our next question will go first to Paul Thiessen. If and how should knowledge of events in society outside of the briefings figure into judicial decision-making? Do you feel that independent research and information gathering by judges and clerks should be part of the process?
Well, two answers to that. The first is no. When we have cases that come before us, the record is the record, and it's been developed in the trial court, reviewed typically in the Court of Appeals, and we should stick to the record that's before us. It's not really the role of judges to go outside the record and to search out additional factual information, et cetera. And so that, I think, is a commitment, one of those commitments that makes sure that judges stay in their proper lane under the separation of powers. That said, I do think that one of the strengths of our court is the diversity of experiences that all of us bring as we sit around the table and discuss cases. So our lived experience, our professional experience, clearly those things come to bear in how we understand the cases. One of the greatest gifts that I had in my life, and was when I was in the legislature, was a decade of traveling around Minnesota to all 87 counties, talking to people in their workplaces, their churches, their homes. And what that allowed me to do is to hold those conversations kind of in my head and in my heart. And when I go into the judicial work that I do, and trying to step into the shoes of others, which is really what the job is about, to understand their position, their plea, those experiences, do come to bear as we kind of shape your perception of what justice truly is. So you shouldn't look outside the record, but certainly the experiences you bring to bear are an important consideration, when people think about who they ought to elect as judge.
Michelle McDonald.
Yes, you should not look outside the record, but you need to have a complete record. And what I'm seeing time and time again in court is judges are going off the record with attorneys and clients and then going back on the record in court, and they're saying things, and anytime you're in court, I think that's the record. You have to keep it going. You can't be saying, let's go off the record and saying other things, unless you're talking about the weather or something like that. But that isn't what's happening in our district courts. They're going off the record, and then you're creating a record for an appellate court, but you should not have to. The appeal is like the last step in due process. If our judges were paying more attention to the individuals and the cases before them and actually following the rule of law, we wouldn't have to have an appeals court. And our appeals court is very cookie cutter as well. Our appeals court is, they're supposed to look for errors that judges make, and they're just looking for ways to actually say that the judge did okay and affirm the lower court decisions. And that's why I want to be and expect to be a Minnesota Supreme Court justice, so I can make sure that people look at the particular facts in front of them, reach a fair and equitable result, and I'm talking about the judge.
Thank you. This next question may have something of a legislative bent to it, but and the question will go first to Michelle McDonald, but I think it's a good question. Federal Reserve President Neil Kashkari and former Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Alan Page have proposed amending the Minnesota State Constitution as follows. Shall the Minnesota State Constitution be amended to provide that all children have an equal right to a quality public education? What are your thoughts about whether such an amendment is appropriate or necessary? Michelle McDonald.
I don't think it's necessary. I really don't. I mean, here's what support of our children involves. It involves providing our children with a home, all the basic necessities of life, a good education, health care, and that doesn't mean health insurance. It means that if your child is sick, you are going to bring the child and take care of that child in that sick state, and also love and companionship. So I don't think we need to be legislating our education. It's too much. Our education shouldn't be memorizing things, and that's what they're doing to our young ones. They're having them memorize and feeling really bad because they don't know the answers to questions. Education is more. It's not about memorizing things. So, and it's not about our government giving us education. We need to bring education back into our own communities.
Thank you. Paul Thiessen?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question. And one thing I just want to start out with, I'm very pleased that Justice Page is supporting my effort at election, not re-election, election. As to the state constitution, I don't know that as a justice I should express really my opinion on how that issue should come out one way or another. But what I will say is I am a strong believer in a robust state constitution as an independent document, an independent source of rights for Minnesotans, separate from the U.S. federal constitution that represents our unique values. We have already in our state constitution a right to education, which doesn't exist in the federal constitution. We have a right to hunt and fish that doesn't exist in the federal constitution. And our Supreme Court has actually interpreted our state constitution, where the federal constitution and the state constitution are somewhat parallel, to provide broader rights like the right to equal protection before the law. You're protected more in Minnesota under our Constitution. The right to privacy and dignity. You're protected more under our Minnesota Constitution. And I really strongly believe that we need, as a state, not to just defer all of our constitutional decision-making authority to 9 people sitting in Washington, D.C. We should hold that here ourselves as Minnesotans. And I really strongly believe in a robust state constitution.
Thank you. This next question will go first to Paul Thiessen. What is the Supreme Court doing to restore trust in the justice system for all participants, or what should it do?
Well, I mean, that is kind of it's a critical question, and I'm glad that it was asked because, what we've seen in this country, in this state over the last, quarter of a century is an increasing decline in trust for institutions of all kinds. Now, I'm happy to say that generally speaking, when we've looked at the issue, people continue to trust the courts more than other institutions, but there are things we can do. The first and foremost, and it's what we've tried to do in this campaign, is get out and educate Minnesotans about why our courts are so important and be more transparent about how we make decisions. I go out and talk to high school seniors and other high school students as often as I can, as an example, to spread that word, and we built our campaign around trying to get out and hold town meetings all across the state, virtually, of course, to educate people around that. Because I think that transparency, that understanding is critical to folks doing that. And they just also, the other thing that we need to do and make sure that we do at a district court level and at the Supreme Court level is make sure that people feel like they're really being listened to. What we have found is that when people feel they've been listened to, even if they may lose the case, if their voice is being heard, which it isn't often enough, and that's something we've talked about before and we need to work on, then at least they have their trust that the system is working and it's fair, and that's how we maintain the legitimacy of our court system.
Thank you. Michelle McDonald.
Well, being heard is so close to being loved that they are almost indistinguishable. In my 33 years, I don't think the Supreme Court has done much. I think, and as I said earlier, there are too many laws, rules, and regulations. We talk about separation of powers. What about the balance of powers? What about judges in their judicial decisions, and the legislative saying that the legislature is doing wrong. And what about the legislature actually talking about judges? There's got to be a balance there, and there isn't. They're too separated, okay? There needs to be a balance. It's a system of checks and balances. Our Constitution, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, our court orders are to uphold and protect those fundamental rights. Rights like the air that we breathe, fundamental rights. They're not to legislate and actually create more laws. I've said, our Constitution doesn't give us rights. Our courts don't give us rights. They're protecting rights that we already have by being born on this earth.
Thank you. All right, we have just time for one more question, and so I've saved this one for last, and we'll go first to Michelle McDonald. If you're elected to serve on the court and you serve until retirement, what would you hope that your best friend would say about your service on the court at your retirement party? And what do you hope your staunchest critic would say on that same occasion?
I think my staunchest critic will say, Michelle, wow, you were right. You know, you did it, Michelle. You actually transformed court as we know it, and transformed family court as we know it. Family court is unnecessary, and and that's what my friends would say. My friends would say, Michelle, you persevered, you were persistent, you care about the people, and you helped everyone, just like you wanted to. Not one at a time, Michelle, but you helped everyone by what you did as Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court.
Thank you. Paul Thiessen.
I guess I would hope that both people would say you were fair. And you know, if that's what people take away from the work that I do as a judge, I think that's probably the highest praise that you could get.
Thank you. All right, it's now time for closing statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute to conclude, beginning with Paul Thiessen.
Well, first I want to thank the League and the Minnesota State Bar Association for their work in sponsoring this. And I'm pleased, you know, from the Bar Association that 92% in a recent survey preferred me to be the next Supreme Court Justice. That was very vindicating for me. My ask of you is this: please vote. And when you do, make sure you turn over the ballot and vote for judge. It really, our courts affect very fundamental rights, whether you have a roof over your head, whether your family's going to stay together, whether you are going to be in jail, whether our streets are going to be safe. That is a really important job, and so please do a little bit of Google searching, research your candidate, make an informed decision, and ask, who am I most confident is going to exercise good judgment in tough cases? That's really what judges do. And consider our experience, our professional ethical records, our commitment to fair justice based on the rule of law and equal access to justice for all. And I respectfully ask for your support. But please, at the end of the day, the most important thing is please do vote.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Michelle McDonald.
And I also want to thank you, William, and Jackie, and the Minnesota League of Women Voters and other sponsors for this epic event. And for continuing to have it even though we are going through hard times with COVID. I'm the best candidate for the Minnesota Supreme Court because I'm not afraid to speak out about the corruption in our court system and the need to end legal tyranny and to restore justice for all. Over the last 33 years, I've seen our court system evolve into a complex system of injustice. This will not be business as usual. If elected to the Minnesota Supreme Court, I pledge to eradicate judicial corruption, ensure judicial integrity, and restore our rights to access to the courts, due process, and a fair trial as required under the Constitution and the rule of law. I advocate a unitive system of justice that is equal and voluntary, where those in conflict meet in a safe place, hear each other out, and decide what to do about their conflict. Thank you for your vote, and I look forward to serving as your Minnesota Supreme Court Justice.
Thank you. Thank you to the candidates. This has been interesting and enlightening. Thank you to the viewing audience. And finally, thank you to CCX Media for recording this forum. Now we will hear from Golden Valley Voter Service Chair Jackie Wells with closing comments.
League of Women Voters of Golden Valley and the Minnesota State Bar Association, I thank the candidates for the contested seat of the Minnesota Supreme Court for answering voters' questions tonight. And a huge thank you to William Johnson of the League of Women Voters Wayzata Plymouth area for being our moderator. We hope our forum has helped voters to make an informed decision. Many thanks to CCX Media for recording this forum. They have always been great partners for our local leagues and have gone above and beyond during this election season. This forum will be replayed on CCX channels and will be available online at ccxmedia.org, and we'll have links to this forum on our League of Women Voters Facebook pages and websites. As I hope you all know, early voting is open at your city hall and other early voting centers during regular business hours until November 2, plus on Saturday, October 31. You may also request an absentee ballot be mailed to you, but do that right away, please. Early voter registration ends tomorrow, October 13, but voters can register to vote when applying for an absentee ballot and also on Election Day. To check if you're registered to vote, and or to apply for an absentee ballot, visit mnvotes.org, which is the Minnesota Secretary of State's website, or vote411.org, which is a League of Women Voters website. Vote411.org also has candidates' responses to questions and links to other candidate forums. I hope you know the general election is on November 3rd. Vote. It counts. Thank you.